So I'll go first. I'm Mia Dan, and I'm the CEO of Lighthouse3. And I left the technology world about 5 years back. It's a long story. If you want to hear the longer version, meet me later. I'm happy to share that. But I focus mostly on the applications of AI and ethics of AI and helping companies adopt technologies more responsibly. I also run technology meetups right here in the Bay Area and take a women-first approach to all our technology meetups. We do believe that women should be mainstream. We are not trying to create a new special club of women. It's more about recognition and representation. And we also, we recently published last year I published the 100 Women in AI Ethics list. We just are launching our online directory. I'm a little tired because we just launched it last week, this Monday at Oxford, at Lady Margaret Hall, which is the first women's college at Oxford. So if you're working in the space of AI ethics and you are a woman and would like to be included, we would love to have you and get your ideas. And we do focus more on getting more the marginalized groups, minorities included, and give them representation, give them recognition for the work they do. So that's me. I'll let these amazing women go next.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Yuen. I lead our data science for Salesforce.org, specifically around our nonprofit cloud and our education cloud. So we work with 40,000 nonprofits around the world to basically help them understand how to get more value out of their data. So in addition to that, I'm also super passionate about women and technology. A few years ago, I founded a not-for-profit, which was all about getting more women into the professional data space through mentoring and community building. So there's also that. And then lots of things.
Lovely meeting you, Suzanne. It's my first time meeting all these lovely women. I'm Hirini Gokul, and I am visiting from Seattle. I am so excited to be here and see the sun out here. The sun's gone away in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. I've been sort of a corporate beast for all my life until lately. I built businesses in the cloud for Microsoft, and I'll start doing that for Amazon shortly. But my real passion is accelerating the growth of women in tech and every place. And I've been focused on investing in businesses that do that with female founders. I advise, I consult, and I show up and speak and learn. So thank you all for being here on a beautiful Saturday afternoon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rona Yu. I have much less leadership and work experience than the other three wonderful panelists here. I'm currently an undergraduate senior in computer science at Caltech. And I have a course specialization in machine learning and data science. And in addition to that, I've been conducting research in data privacy regulations, which is why I was interested in attending this summit. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So this is a panel discussion about women in tech. So it's all about diversity and representation. So can someone just feel free to just shout out, what does diversity mean to you? When you talk about diversity, what comes to mind? Harmony, that's good. Who else? Inclusion, brilliant. Who else? Somebody here? Multiple perspectives, brilliant. Makes sense? Okay, so can we just go around and maybe start with Rona? What does diversity mean to this panel?
I think for me, it would mean respect for and inclusion of a wide variety of backgrounds, perspectives, and perspectives as well.
Diversity is this, right? It's making sure that everybody is not just having a seat at this table, but they are included in the conversation. We have our voices, we are inviting your voices in, and we represent the voices that are not here. The folks at this table, we're women in tech, but we recognize that we come from privilege. We come from backgrounds that let us be here and speak. So we have to represent and amplify the voices that you don't hear at this table. I'll add one more thing, which is, as long as I've been in business, we've talked diversity and equity, right? 20, 30 years, I forget. I've lost count of the number of trainings I've done Who has not done a training in diversity? Not a single hand goes up. Why are we still talking about it? And that's why this panel is important today. We're talking about it because a lot of the inequities you see in the system today are being codified and automated and institutionalized for the next generation. So it's more important now than ever to not just fix the bias that exists, but to work on proactively setting up the frame so our next generation does not have to, well, they will agitate for other things, but they may not have to agitate for this particular thing.
Amen. So I'm actually going to ask the audience how technical you want us to get. Because I want to go super technical right now with this question. I want to talk all about artificial intelligence. I want to talk bias in our data. I want to talk what those systemic issues that it's bringing up are, right? So, okay, I'm hearing, so I'm going to go a little bit more technical then. So we know that with artificial intelligence, okay, so first of all, we know that society has diversity issues, right? Like when we look at it across the board, when you're talking about like funnels going in, let's talk about life cycles, right? Like of employment, let's use employment because everybody here needs a job, unless you're really lucky, which case, good for you. We should be friends. No, but if you're talking about very early in the life cycle, right, you have diversity questions there. In the middle of the diversity cycle, right, you talk about inclusion. How do you keep diversity, right? And then at the end, it's like, how do you grow it? How do you have diversity in leadership, right? So we know that there are systemic things that the data really just kind of shows us, right? And we also know that with artificial intelligence, if we have those biases in our data, if we have those biases in our systems, if we have those biases in our society, right, they get amplified. And so the question becomes, how do you really start addressing some of those amplifications and some of those problems that your biases and your data can really start having? Right? And so one of the things that you can do is have more diversity in there. And that's one of the ways. There's many, there's several, right? Some of them are technical, some of them are non-technical, some of them are policy, whatever. But that's one of the ways that you can start looking at that. So I can go into that more.
I think that's a good question to go deep into. Do you want to say something, Mia?
Yeah. So one thing I'd like to point out, the reason I wanted to level set, what does diversity mean? Because I'll be honest, diversity means different things to different people. There is gender. There is also ageism, which is rampant in the technology world, because we've all worked in that space for so long. But there's also diversity in perspectives. And somebody said that diversity of perspective is critical because you're not trying to create another exclusive club of more women. You're trying to make sure that more women are included. And when we talk about bias, we're really talking about systemic bias against a particular group of people. And to begin to address that, then we have to be very intentional about it. Because the reason we're having challenges moving in that direction, why we are still sitting here talking about it, like, are we still protesting this shit? I mean, seriously.
We are.
It's 2019. Like, there are older women who fought for, like, our right to vote and stuff. And still, here we are talking about it again. Because being intentional matters, and I use that word a lot, is being intentional about the group that you're trying to help, you're trying to increase representation for. So, that was. Do you want to go, Mike?
Yeah. No. I was going to say, I love, your categorizations. I mean, I love a lot of the work you do, let's be honest. But I also just love that you've pointed out, right now, we have certain legal categories that we say you must be fair. We aim for fairness in this. We aim for equity in this, right? But there's more than that, right? And there's this question of like, so for instance, one of the things that I'm looking at when I'm developing my team is like this question of, or as I'm looking at, our array of panels and like our UX design, which we can go into later, is this question of educational diversity. So our team tends to be super educated just because that's what data scientists tend to be right now. That's what the market essentially says. And a lot of our work is very, very research oriented. So we tend to be very on the research side. So I'm looking for other people, when I'm looking for opinions, I'm looking for educational diversity, right? Because that's different from us. And fundamentally, that's what diversity is. It's about being different. And not just being shy about being different, but being open and being collective and being inclusive of it, right? So I love this one story about one of my colleagues, her daughter came into our work for an event. And her daughter is 13 and very shy. We all remember being a teenager. And there was this other talk going on. So a colleague of ours went up to her and said to her daughter, she said, "Oh, you're a young person. We want you to come and sit in on this group because we want your opinions as a young person." So not only are you saying, I acknowledge the fact that you're different, I want your opinion because you're different, and I value you because you're different. I'm valuing your diversity, right? Not just being invited to the party, but being asked to put up the playlist.
I love that. And if you would take that example of the young girl being invited to the table, how do you scale that, right? You guys work in businesses, own your businesses. How do you systemize how we hire for that talent that you wouldn't always see? The last time I hired, or the most of the times I built my team, guess what? Referrals make up 80% of my pipeline, right? I see heads nodding. We hire people we know of. What that does is it shuts off the door to people who may not have gone to school with us, who may not have some of the fancy degrees we do, who may not live in the same neighborhoods we do. So think about hiring is the first opportunity where you can broaden. And then once you bring them in, how do you onboard in a way that broadens that discussion? Because people bring their own lived experiences in. I worked for Microsoft for many years, and one of the changes that happened very lately was when you designed a product for a consumer, make sure that you had a representative set of consumers in, because guess who makes all of the decisions, right? The engineers, the research directors, folks who may not have representative experience anymore. So how do we broaden that is super important. And the third thing I'll end with before, we could all talk about this for an hour, but I'll say the third thing, which is symbolism is important. It is not everything, but seeing is believing. So if you own businesses, if you run teams, think about the power of visuals. We have visual cues. My son had a male kindergarten teacher, and trust me, I couldn't get over it. I was like, she's supposed to be lovely and cute and warm and kind. And Mr. Tim was all of that. But I'm sitting here agitating for equity and diversity, and I think my kindergarten teacher should be female, right? So we have that in us. So put up the pictures you want to see. Bring out, you don't need the just same 4 women sitting at panels, but make sure you have the right representation when your company is represented on the street, in PR meetings, at events. And that starts the conversation.
On the topic of education, actually, I wanted to take a slightly different approach. I wanted everyone to think about when they were in grade school, so middle school or high school. Personally, I went to a STEM high school, and many of my colleagues were interested in joining tech companies later on, and they had their eyes set on tech internships after their freshman year of college, so they started coding at a very young age. And an issue I observed is that many of these students actually filtered out their courses, so their STEM courses were the ones that were most important, and other courses in history and politics were kind of the other courses that they had to get through. And I think this creates a sort of closed-mindedness and an opinion that their own discipline is the most important. And I think something we need to increasingly acknowledge is that other disciplines are required to create the most effective technologies. We've been saying again and again today that the technologies we're releasing are going to have unintended consequences, and these are going to require data analysts and software engineers who understand how the data is being analyzed and how the software is being designed, but it's also going to require artists who understand how to best create these new softwares. It's going to require policymakers and lawyers who understand how it can most effectively draft regulations surrounding these technologies, and it's going to require communicators who are able to translate these more technical concepts to the general public.
Well said. I'd like to
and
add
ethics, by the way. At Salesforce just got its first chief ethics officers. Congratulations.
I love what you said about having this multidisciplinary approach to things. So I had a conversation with a mother in Oxford. She works for Oxford University, and she said, my husband wants to send my child to programming classes because he's a programmer, and she isn't sure whether or not like she should be forcing a child into STEM. And then I had the same conversation, same question was posed to me today at lunch by another woman who was sitting here, said, I don't know if I want my child to go into STEM, and what do you think? My personal perspective is that you should let your children follow their passion and create a more equitable future for them rather than trying to force them down this path because we feel that's going to make them more successful. So I was just curious, like given your own experiences, whether as a parent or as somebody who's been like through that journey, what advice would you give to a younger self?
Yeah, I would definitely just follow, what you want to do. I had this recent realization recently that I have always been really, really good at math. So I used to be a mathlete when I was, a kid, and then I was a vice president of the math club, and then math has always just been a really, really big thing. So I went into engineering, but my parents never actually made me do it, right? They never suggested it. They didn't really care. They were actually super disappointed that I didn't become a doctor. So sorry, Mom and Dad. Right, engineering was actually not on my radar at all. So I kind of fell into it, disappointed my parents. So there's that. But I think it's let your kids do what they want.
I think it's the story of our lives. We disappoint our parents. Mine are disappointed too that I didn't become a lawyer. I have this thing where I grew up in India. I grew up in many places, but I went to school in India. And I don't think you can leave India if you're not an engineer. So I went to school and I said I want to do math, economics, and archaeology. I'm a history buff. And they said, no, you'll do physics, chemistry, and math and be very happy. And that's what I did. But so I would tell my younger self to learn how to reason and to learn how to problem solve and to learn how to communicate. Because that's the jobs of tomorrow, right? I mean, even the jobs of today. Think about sort of the folks we admire at work, we respect at work. The smartest and brightest, of course, but it's folks who learn how to build bridges, who learn to get consensus and solve problems, who have empathy. The day you're late because something happens, they have empathy for that. And so I encourage my son to be, I forget the name of the lady who was playing ballet with the robot, but that's who I want my son to be.
I think I would tell my younger self that you don't have to necessarily rule out other disciplines in order to be good at what you do. When I first came into Caltech, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to major in or do afterwards. I was a computer science major, but there was actually a law professor from a different school who came to talk to my school about his work in law, and I found his work really interesting. He was using a historical perspective to analyze modern constitutional rights of businesses, and it was very different from any of the analytical courses I had at Caltech. And I was actually worried for a period of time because I was thinking I really enjoy these legal aspects, these political aspects, and they seem very different from the typical analytical interests that my classmates have, so maybe I'm not at the right school for me. But when I explored tech policy and I was exploring questions on the intersection of innovation and public policy, I was surprised to realize how many other people were actually interested in the same things that I was interested in. And if you're eager to seek out interdisciplinary collaborations, people are very willing.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'll share a little bit more about the work that I've been doing, which is a 100 Women list. So I was also born in India, American by nationality. So my parents didn't have a whole lot of grand ambitions for me. I had one job, actually, to get married, have a baby boy. So I'm divorced. And my child came out as transgender a few years back. So, talking about disappointing your parents, I mean, it doesn't get any better than this. So the reason I set up the list was really, it's against this whole elitism of the valley, right? You have to go to a certain school, you have to have a certain degree. It's really run by tech jocks. And they look the same, right? It's like this pale male young men, and no offense to the men in the room, We love our allies. We really do.
Women showing up.
Yeah, we really do appreciate. We couldn't do this without allies. We have a lot of them. I'm really grateful for that. But the key was really looking at like the different diverse perspectives that women bring. Like whether you're a lawyer, you work in HR, or whether you are an engineer or software, like a data scientist, everyone has a role to play, and we can't really do it alone. We can't be this like, okay, let's leave the technology to the jocks, the technology people, and they'll figure it out, because that's why we are in the mess that we are today, right? There is a lot of value that we bring to the table, and we need to recognize that. So one of the approaches we take in all our technology meetup groups is always recruit women speakers first, because the fact is you can throw a rock and hit some guy, right? Finding women and bringing them to the table. I mean, like, there are a lot of women you will not have. Actually, I shared this idea with the folks at Oxford because we went from 100 women in AI ethics conference, which is fantastic, right? 200 women in one room, amazing, right? And we go to Oxford AI conference and it's all manuals. So like, okay, we have a lot of work to do. So that really is an effective way. Just force your conference organizers, force your companies to hire and recruit more, because it's not just saying, okay, let's talk about it. We need to see concrete evidence of that. So my question, in a long-winded way, is to ask you guys, do you have any concrete examples? Like what really works? Say you're not in a position to hire people, build your own teams, because that would be fantastic. You can ensure that. But say you don't have that privilege of hiring your own team. How would you go about like fixing this diversity issue?
I actually going to follow up as a little tag in for the last question, which is sort of a takeaway for everyone here, which you can kind of do if you want to add a little more diversity and differentness to your own personal life, is to sort of evaluate your 10 closest friends and think about how much are they just like you, or how much are they just like each other? And are there some aspects where you're like, hey, I kind of am missing a certain perspective that I might want. So I'll be honest, top 10 friends, I have Republicans in the group.
The shock silence in this room.
But I love having that because I also have some very strong Democrats in my group of friends. And I want their opinions. I want to hear what they have to say, even if I don't like it, right? I want their opinions because I want that differentness and I want that perspective. So I would just say if everybody wants a little takeaway, even if you're not in a position of hiring, but like in your personal life, if you want, you can take that too, right?
I have to look at my top 10 friend list and see who's in there. I love all the ideas here, and I'm sure you guys have some too. The one thing I've been doing for myself, and I'll speak to that, is being a better ally. I speak on behalf of cultures and communities that I don't know much about, right? The LGBTQ community, it's not a lived experience for me. And I am practicing what I preach, which is to not presume to understand, but ask the questions, seek to understand, and look for small ways, small or big, but they can be small, sort of in-the-moment ways to be a better ally. Support somebody asking a question in a meeting that they may not be comfortable asking. Make a request on their behalf. I don't know what you guys feel, but I am always better when I'm advocating for someone as opposed to advocating for myself. I'm a tigress when it comes to my team, but I'm like, oh, I don't need my promotion, but for that person, yes, you gotta give it, right? So I find it helpful to channel my energy on behalf of a group. And that's one way to show diversity in action. Talk is cheap, walk is hard. So I like the question because we have to learn how to walk.
I actually wanted to elaborate on Mia's earlier comment, thanking the males in this room. I think having males in a conversation about diversity is really, really important. And the last thing we want to do is have a group of women secluded in their own little group talking about diversity, because that's a little bit ironic, and the whole point of diversity is to have a wide variety of perspectives. So I think that even if you don't identify with a minority group, it's important that you do still stay engaged in the conversation, as well as if you are in a minority group and you're interested in perpetuating the conversation, that you are inclusive of everyone regardless of where they identify.
Thank you. I'll get to you in a second. I have a story to share. So at Oxford, so you go from this all-women conference and you go to this panel, and it makes, maybe it's just me, it made me physically like, it was painful to be in a environment, panels, right? 5 white men on a panel. So yeah, so I'm sitting there and there's no opportunity to ask questions. So I'm sitting there listening. I'm debating, should I walk out or should I stay? I'm not the kind of person who does public concentrations very well. I just don't. As a person of color, as a woman of color, again, my background, so I don't do that. So I'm thinking and tweeting, I said, what do I do? Stay, not stay? So everybody's chiming in. So finally I said, okay, there's no opportunity to ask questions, but I jumped in anyways and asked them, how does this panel feel about bias in AI data sets, and do you feel qualified to answer that question, given that there are no women here, right? The wild thing is the people who came up to me, and also one woman came up to me and hugged me later, because, oh my God, it was hard. And then men, a lot of men who came up to me and said, like, thank you. And one of them has a daughter. And he says, thank you for asking that question, because he said, my daughter always makes sure that I, questions me on that. So just know that even if it feels like a little uncomfortable to say it out, and you may be the minority in the room, just go for it anyways. You'll be surprised. Yeah. Please go ahead. Do you need a microphone?
Thank you. Wonderful panel. So we're talking about diversity, and we're talking about different styles of leadership. And I think there's this unasked question, which is when we talk about men in leadership and we talk about women in leadership, what do you feel that women bring to the table that provides diversity, or what's different about women in leadership?
I can start. Okay, so I have a co-organizer. Her name is Rosie Campbell, and she works for Partnership on AI. And Rosie's got bright pink hair. And so I invited her to talk about deep neural nets. And she's done this wonderful presentation on deep neural nets using kittens. And the thing is, we have this, and she spoke to a room full of, it was twice the size of this room, and she spoke to these men about DNNs, and her slides were with kittens and pink highlights. It's a very technical talk. And she had a pink water bottle. She's all about branding, and her branding is like pink. So all I'd like to say is, we had a laugh about it, because she said, she's ex-BBC, so she's like, I gave this talk, and all these men had to sit there and listen to me. It was brilliant. And what my biggest takeaway from that was that you don't have to be like men to succeed. In workplace or outside, we need to create our own vision of leadership, and it's personal to each person. So define what your leadership style is, and just go for it, because I feel society puts these little boxes around you, pigeonholes, like this is what leadership looks like. It's a white male in a suit. No, it could be somebody like Rosie with bright pink hair, and she still gives a killer presentation. So many men lined up to talk to her because they said this is the best presentation we've ever seen, like, on this topic. So.
I hesitated when you asked the question, because I've been asked this question a lot. And I come from Washington State, and our newly elected Speaker of the House is a lovely gay lady called Lori Jenkins. And she said this, and I'm going to repeat the words because I think that that's important for us to remember. Women are wonderful leaders. Men are wonderful leaders. None of us can individually bear or represent the burden of an entire gender. Don't hold yourself up to that. Also, don't hold yourself up to any stereotypes. Women have to be likable. Men have to be competent. For everyone in this room, is this being recorded? I cannot say it, but F that, right? It's not important. All we are saying is all voices need a seat at the table. Everybody, red, blue, yellow, purple, whatever color you are, shape, size, you need a seat at the table. And for women especially, it's an opportunity to try, to make decisions. Some of those may be right, some of those may not be right. And Ms. Jenkins was saying, she's the first speaker, she's going to make some good ones, she's going to make some bad mistakes, but that's all okay. All we're asking for is a chance to be at the table, being the person we are individually.
I'm also going to take another perspective on this and say that often when I talk with my peers about why they've decided to major in XYZ, some of them will often say because I had a mentor or because I had a teacher in this field who I really respect and want to become like that. I just want to become like that when I am older. And I think having women in leadership actually fosters a new generation where younger individuals are able to look up to those leaders and think that is what I want to do. And I am able to do that because there are individuals like me who have accomplished that too.
Okay, let's start with you and we'll get you next. Go ahead.
Okay, if you don't mind me adding on your point about what females bring to the table. By the way, my name is Angela Kim. I'm from Sydney, Australia. So I'm from Australia, and I'm learning so much from. As you can see, that past 2 weeks I've been traveling from San Francisco, Boston, Montreal, and Vancouver, and then San Francisco. For this occasion, I have to change my trip. I'm flying out tonight to New York, and then coming back to San Francisco. So I'm doing 3 weeks hardcore boot camp because I'm working as a woman in AI education ambassador in Australia as a non-profit organization. And there's so much we can do for the girls, especially the areas where that they're not very comfortable, like lower socioeconomic, right? For females, I believe we do have a compassion. That's really different. I'm not like dumbing down or looking down the guys. Guys, you are awesome. Especially the guys here, they are the biggest supporters of the females because you're ready to and you're leading to work together. And to me, it's really important. Back to the diversity point. Really acknowledging everyone, different background and different color, different gender, different age even, right? Because we are doing a lot of work with the younger girls because society is focusing especially for girls. We need to have a really session to encourage girls, especially in the lower socioeconomic area, to join and give them opportunity to grow into technology, right? Right. But what we are kind of overlooking is about how about the senior citizens? Because in technology and with the longevity, they need to be really major user of technology, and we are taking it for granted that because they don't like technology, they do. My father-in-law and my father, they love technology.
Right. So, I'm sorry, Angela. I
yes,
would love for
you know what I
to
mean?
continue.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you have a question? Because first of all, welcome.
Yes. So I want to ask
go
you.
ahead.
So
Yes.
in terms of bringing the diversity together, do you have any plan in your organizations and your school and your environment how you can more proactively bring it together to move it forward?
Anybody?
Thank you.
wants to talk? Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll go first. So I work for a company called Salesforce, which is amazing. And we have these things called Ohana groups, actually. So they're these, it's almost like a club, if you think about when you were back in school, except a club that everybody's welcome to and supported by the company and supported by the peers and leadership. So we have like a women's network where every week we get together and we have our own communities. We have our Bold network. We have our they're all called forces. So it's all Bold Force, Latino Force, Women's Force, Asia Pac Force. So we have a lot of different forces. And what that's really helped us to do is bring diversity and allow us to connect also, even if we don't have it in our team, to connect with a group that is diverse and does have that representation so that we can be better allies and also get more inclusion and to get their opinions as well. And so that's just one thing that I think our company has done that's amazing. And so for diversity. Yeah.
I love that. Microsoft calls it ERGs, not as fun as Ohana, but it's the same concept, right? Let's create spaces for people to come together. To your point on multi-generational, I think there is something, a lot of people are doing work in this, right? It's the only time in history we have 5 generations in the workplace. You have the silent to the Gen Zs coming in. And I think that some companies, there's a few startups in the Seattle area doing some smart work on partnering sort of the youngest entrants into the workforce and the oldest experienced workers in the workforce, because at a minimum, there is knowledge transfer. And I think there are skills and experience you can benefit from. So thank you for focusing on that. The third thing I'll leave you with is this. I was appointed diversity lead multiple times in my career. And if you ever get that, the one question I learned to ask was, is there money? Is there a budget for this role? And is the leadership behind it? Because without that, you're a token, you're not a force for change.
Yeah, along the lines of diversity and backgrounds, my school is actually starting a program which is under construction where we have a group of students who are in computer science, but we also have faculty members who are in computer science and history. So they're professors who have no tech background. One teaches a Supreme Court law class and another teaches Chinese history. And these diverse individuals are individuals who are interested and concerned about the state of technology in society. So these interdisciplinary discussions can foster additional diversity in my school community.
Great, thank you. Great question. Thank you so much. One thing we do also focus on, I would suggest metrics. Like have some sort of a metrics for the groups that you're trying to recruit in. Like how did you do? Because otherwise it's just talk. You're not accountable. For example, we make an effort to get more LGBTQ plus folks on our team. We also try for Black and Latinx community, which are underrepresented in technology. So being very intentional and saying these are the groups we want to focus and do outreach to them. And like you said, older, right? Older folks in technology do a proactive outreach. I think that also helps a lot. Thank you.
Hi, I would like to ask my question based on two examples you guys provided earlier. One is around your example, Harini, about this male kindergarten teacher who the role that he plays is against the dominant masculinity constructions that we have in society, right? And then the example you gave, Mia, about the pink-haired lady, but this time enacting the dominant femininity roles, and then creating impact that way. So my question is, this may require a little bit of personal reflection on your part, is like, how do you enact these dominant femininity discourses at work, whether in terms of conforming to it to create impact or resisting to it to create impact?
I've done a lot of thinking about that because this is one example of bias. We all have biases, right? That's why unconscious bias is quite rightly a topic well delved into these days. We give labels, right? People don't give themselves labels. We attribute labels to people. And so I say, Tim cannot be a kindergarten teacher because he is a man. If I hired him, I would have written a job description for a kind and caring person. Not many men you think would apply to that. So we set up the system, we rig the system up in some ways. So it's two things. One, systematically, what can we do? In this case, like, look at your job descriptions and what you write. Make them gender neutral. There's a lovely lady, we'll talk about resources. There's lots of resources out there to do that. But stop the labeling. Do not put people in a box. Second, don't put yourself in a box. When I was new to the workforce, I used to start by saying, if I can, please, like this little small voice shrinking my body. I put myself in a box. Now I start speaking. I bring my whole self into the table, and I am myself. And so the labels associated with me are things I can do something about versus something that gets attributed because belong to a certain gender. So you have the power to control how people define you.
I have a very non-traditional background. So for me, it's always been about being the rebel and representing myself. I grew up with two older brothers who used to love beating me up. So I thought growing up, no kidding. I mean, I was the youngest kid, but I wanted to be tough. I wanted to be like them. For years and years, I was always like, and I got into the technology world, and we are sold on this notion you have to be like the men to compete. So there's some research that I came across about, do women VCs, having more women VCs, is that going to help? Like, has it improved the number of women who are getting funded? Actually, there's research that shows no, because women are using the same metrics that men do. and they're dismissing women. So we need to actively own our leadership style, and it doesn't matter if you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, you're part of women, or whoever you are, own it, and don't conform to the stereotypes. And which is, I always bring up Rosie's example, because I think she shattered every norm, but she is so talented, qualified, and I think that gets overshadowed by the packaging that we're used to seeing. So, thank you for asking that question. And then we'll go to you.
Cool.
Next.
Thank you. This is a question for Suzanne, right? Okay, so you said we all have talked, this has come up in basically every panel about bias in AI and biased data. Are there ways that Salesforce actually, do you start feeding it different data? Do you change the algorithm? I want to know more technical, way more technical than what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a whole bunch of things there. So, gosh, where do I start? So one of the things, okay, so I'll say a little bit about the platform and some of the things, which is that we don't own our data. Actually, the customers own their data. We don't touch it. We basically create the tools that sort of allow them to work on it. And so the question is, how do you help educate and how do you help empower the customers to work on their data and their instances to better their businesses and understand their customers, right? So it's a little bit meta. But one of the things that we do is we encourage people to look at their data. It's amazing how many people actually do not look at their data. And when they look at, for instance, their recruiting funnels, they realize, oh my gosh, it turns out that 90% of my applicants are, this is a total fake example, I'm not going to say any customer is part of this, but a pretty known example actually with a company that starts with A about recruiting funnels. Okay, but so 90% male, right? And so if you have 90% of males in your funnel, 90% of your engineers are males, well, when it looks at a female applicant, it's going to look at something different, right? But here's the problem. You wouldn't know this unless you looked at your data. And you wouldn't really know what that means unless you became educated on it, right? So education is one part of it. We as a platform have also recently implemented as well some bias things. So for instance, we create tools that allow and democratize AI. So if you're going to choose something that we think is so let's say for instance, zip code, we know is a proxy for socioeconomic status. And if you say, oh, okay, I'm going to pick that, well, we have some products that are integrated in that will say basically, hey, actually, do you know that this is potentially going to increase in bias? And if you say, hey, I'm going to choose that as a field that I don't want to include because I don't want to include bias into I don't want to introduce that bias in. Well, now we have another tool that will actually go through and say, what else is actually correlated to that indicator? So for instance, with gender, we know actually that name is correlated with gender as well, right? So John is usually a boy, for instance. Right? So let's say if I don't want to have gender, I say, I include gender into my thing, into my algorithm. Well, now we do a check, the mission models do a check, and it says, hey, actually, you also want to exclude name. Did you know that this field that you've created also is similar? And so you, as the user, are empowered now, right? So that you can create those changes. And it's your choice, right? It's really human in the loop. So those are just a few examples.
Sorry, I just got timed, but one last question and we can wrap this up because I know you've been waiting for a while.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to know, that it feels like there's especially in tech with a lot of engineers, there's a lot of a sense of meritocracy. And so you've talked about educational diversity and bringing people to the table, but once they get there, performance reviews are very based on meritocracy. And so I'm wondering, do you have any things that have worked in terms of, I guess, leveling the playing field once people are on it?
It's a great question because that is critical to success, right? Hiring is part one, and I love everything Suzanne mentioned, like blind hire to the extent possible. Once you get in back to the old we are measuring our new world with old metrics. So we think about promotions and the data that is easy, we measure what is easy to measure. The data that gets spun out or spit out is promotions. And you may have data about women and men doing well. What's more interesting is promotion velocity, correlated to the impact and the work the person has done. And you will find lots of research. I have personal examples where women and or younger to organization employees take on harder projects with less probability of success, leading to less than favorable outcomes, leading to fewer promotions, which means we basically tell the folks taking risk, don't. I'm not going to reward you at the end. So what we've trained managers to do is look at promotion velocity between comparable peer groups. Time's up, so I'm stopping.
Can Rona? Please.
So I don't have any personal experience with hiring or anything like that, but I would say that addressing unconscious bias is something that we should actively be pursuing, and things like acknowledging that other disciplines are just as important as yours, or that other individuals with different backgrounds can contribute just as much when you're working with new technologies, is something that I would encourage everyone to do.
Thank you all so much for coming and joining us.